Hello everybody and welcome to our podcast for this week, and this episode is going to be something that's very much transpired over the last couple of days, which we saw on the BBC website, and it was about these two British in effect jihadis who'd actually gone over to fight for the Islamic State, and they've been captured, and now they are complaining because they've lost their British nationality. So today is where do your loyalties lie, and are you entitled to the benefit of belonging to a country that you don't really want to belong to? So do you want to start off with that, Theo?
Well, good morning to you as well.
Good morning.
Very interesting topic. Humans are basically very, very simple. And the philosophers and all these intelligent psychologists and people like Jordan Peterson, they use their stratospheric brain power to decode human behavior, because they go at a slightly more complicated level where you do need to be a little bit more intelligent. Me being a much more simple person, I understand the basic rules of human behavior, which is we function to reduce anxiety, because as cavemen that kept us alive because we escaped predators and were motivated for our basic needs of survival. Then step 2, and that's done by instinct, by the way, because if you were chased by a saber-toothed tiger, instinct was the quickest way of surviving. And that's why, of course, in today's world we're all slaves of instant gratification, because that's instinctual. Secondly, we need structure. And because we need structure to be tribal animals, structure reduces our anxiety and is good for us. And of course, within structure, we need leadership and sense of belonging. So structure, sense of belonging, leadership, anxiety reduction. That's all we need. Everything else comes from that. And anything that doesn't work like that is bad for humans. So the first question we need to ask is, which is a much more salient question and actually a much more worrying and opens up a bigger, more dangerous issue, is why are these people feeling the need to leave and go and fight for ISIS, rather than the idiots stripping them of their nationality? Because that's a shutting the door after the horse bolts. I mean, of course they're right, but that's not going to fix anything. It's like the Americans tightening up on their gun laws instead of asking what's wrong with the fabric of society that's happening in the first place, because things have functioned perfectly well up to now. It's
actually interesting about that, because Donald Trump's getting a lot of flack over the whole gun law thing, and I think 750,000 people have descended on Washington. Yeah, Obama never really did anything about it either. And
it's all vested interest. I mean,
of course it is.
The politicians are only going to react in an instinctual way, as I explained just now, in an instinctual way in their own vested interest, because people expect them to do something about a problem, whereas the underlying problem is much more difficult to deal with.
Yeah, but it's one thing. I mean, if you look at the Americans, for example, their Second Amendment is you know, everyone's got the right to bear arms. But actually, that's what it is. It's an amendment, and you can re-amend it. But the thing is, as soon as you start amending one thing, you're creating a precedent and actually look at all the other areas as well. But
it's functioned very well up to now, hasn't it? Why is it changing now?
Well, there's a lot of school. There's a lot of shootings, and
because society's falling apart.
Okay, Theo, if I'm ever going to finish off a sentence here, it's going to be a wonder today, because you keep on jumping in.
Wonders never cease.
Wonders never cease. Well, that's true. So, for example, actually, my daughter reminded me that Australia had a really good program when there was a school shooting over there, which they haven't had. Is that they actually brought back the weapons of some or something along the line, which would be too costly for them for Americans, but anyone can literally go and buy a gun over there. I mean, they're even marketing it to 12-year-olds. Anyway, but that's not what I wanted to talk about. It was about the whole, where do you belong? And you look at what's happening in the States at the moment, and there's a lot, you know, and people are still burning flags. You know, they're burning the American flag. As soon as you do that, I mean, we don't have it over here, but as soon as that happens, you are already telling the world that actually you don't belong there. If you can't accept or respect what that flag or what that symbol represents, then you've got no right being there. In fact, to me, you're actually committing treason.
Okay, two things. One, people will argue that's free speech, and two, nobody would dare do it in the Middle East or Russia, would they? Why not?
Well, they get shot.
Oh, really? Then that sounds much more sensible to me, doesn't it?
Well, again, but the thing
Why would
is,
that be more sensible?
But the thing is, treason. I mean, I think treason actually is one of the few things that still has the death penalty over here. Actually, even in the UK.
It does.
So as soon as you've got to fight for ISIS against your own country, you have actually in effect committed treason.
Well, actually, free speech is potentially treason. You know why?
No, go on.
Because free speech weakens the fabric of society. And therefore,
hold on
it's the enemy of the state.
Hold on a second. Yeah, that does come from a model of your world. I mean, we've had this conversation before about democracy and everything. Free speech is still part of being in a democratic society. So you could argue that
it could be, but therefore treason is part of a democratic society.
No, because it's a very definitive law. It's a very definitive rule that has been implemented.
The state, if you weaken or go against the interests of the state, that is treason by definition. Therefore, free speech is treason.
No, we're talking about threat. So I mean,
it is a threat, and that's how exactly these idiots are allowed. That's why the idiots feel they can burn the flag.
Hold on a second, Theo. Challenging what you don't believe is right. So, for example, someone goes to court, they don't agree with the judicial system, for example, and they will challenge it. That doesn't actually make them. That doesn't actually make them a terrorist.
No, they are. That's a very interesting point.
But if you don't like the law, because the law can be an arse.
Well, these guys are trying. You see, what they're doing is they're going through official channels to try and change the law, whereas free speech is not an official channel; it is an unregulated channel.
Yeah, but in some cases, it does have to be unregulated before it does become regulated.
I said these idiots think they can burn the flag. That's unfair. I would say these misguided people think they can burn flags.
Look, ultimately, if you go back to even the caveman days or even the tribal days when people were living in little tribes, if you did not belong to part of that community, you didn't want to be part of the community, you would leave. You would go. There was no passport to hold you there. There was no nothing, so you would just go to another country. If you want to go to another country because you respect their values and things like that, and adopt their way of living, then go and adopt those and become adopted by that country and then apply for your nationalisation there. If you don't like it. If you don't like being here, don't be here. And I'll tell you, you'll be happier, and I'm sure we will be happier as well for that.
Well, that's right.
It's about getting rid of that cancer.
And you see, you're 100% right. And it's a bit like working in a company. And people will come to me and they're stressed out. And they said, well, I didn't like the way something is running, and I thought I should stand up for my rights. Or I should stand up and wave a flag about it. And you have to explain to these people that people reject people who do not fit in. And that's why when people say you're a company man, you're not a company man, it's extremely important to understand what that means. It means you belong or you don't belong. If you don't belong, then you're going to get kicked out. So when you work within a company, if you feel that you have to break official channels and start making sounds about stuff that you're not happy about, then that company is not for you. It's not. You can't say it's unfair. That company's not right for you. Leave and go to a company that shares your values.
Of course, but let me be devil's advocate here for a second now, just because it's important to be able to look at things from very different points of view, because and that's what one of the things I do, because it's the only way I can actually seek to actually find the truth, albeit my truth. And if you take people like, let's say, the suffragettes, for example, so they didn't agree what was happening. They went down a violent path. Is it the suffragettes? They went down a violent path. They were a little bit more they were anarchistic, I suppose, is the way you can describe it. Yet it didn't really work. All it did was for the government to come down, and there's certain things. But
violence never works, and terrorists work.
It doesn't. Violence does breed more violence. Yet when it came to the Second World War, now there was a common enemy, and when the men went to fall for war, they actually got their place. And I'm not saying it was right. I'm not saying that it should have happened that long, but it's almost as though they actually then had to go out and work, and that's when I suppose the value that they brought to society was witnessed or was identified, which it wasn't before, because I mean I don't know who they were before, but they were quite shallow in terms of how they actually saw it, and they actually separated men and women. But if you don't agree with a country's philosophy, for example, I mean, let's face it, not everyone in Russia wanted to be a communist, not everyone in East Germany wanted to be a communist, but the thing is, they were forced into communism. As soon as the wall was put up, they were forced to live that they didn't want to live, but they weren't even allowed to leave.
And of course, true communism doesn't exist either. But again, the simple science of all of this is mirror neurons, because mirror neurons are the brain cells that actually were parts of the system that make us social. So what we're attuned to do is that we mirror other people's similar action, other similar people's actions, and that makes us relate to them. That makes us act as one unit, which then makes the unit stronger.
I think we should actually be very clear about mirror neurons. It's not just being able to. One thing about mirror neurons is it's not just about being able to experience what the other person's experienced, so you can relate to it. All you need to be able to do is observe it, and it's fun. And do you want to tell the story of how mirror neurons? Because they were only discovered about 15 years ago. It's quite a new development, and I think it happened in the University of Parma. I think it was.
Yeah, and I can't remember the exact story, but it was with monkeys, wasn't it?
I'll share the story then.
Go ahead.
So in terms of what they were doing, they were testing out monkeys in terms of by putting a nut or something in front of them, and they had this little, almost like this little. They were attached to some sort of wiring, I suppose, and every time the monkey picked up the thing, and the reason you use monkeys is because of the motor clasping motion that monkeys have similar to humans, and as soon as they picked that up, they would actually release this sound, which on the computer system that they had. Anyway, going back a few days later, or a while later, obviously one of the technicians was hungry, and he actually picked it up. And actually, and this was completely by accident. They then realised that it submitted the same noise as if the monkey had experienced it himself. So all he had to do was observe someone else doing the same motion for him to actually have the same response that he had experienced. That's really what mirror neurons is.
Beautifully stated. Yeah. And of course, that's why addicts, for instance, cocaine addicts, must not see someone using cocaine, or an alcoholic must not see someone drinking alcohol, because they release the same chemicals of their brain as if they've just used it, which makes them crave it intensely. So therefore, environment where you're an addict is very important. But they're going back though to
actually I hadn't even thought of that. That's actually a really, really good.
Going back to similarities, we've said this many times before. But a coloured and a white person looking at another white person.
So hold on a second. So why is a white person white and a black person coloured?
Well, we're just being politically correct.
Well, that's not even being. I mean, I don't even blacks like to be called coloured.
It is true, but again, we're stating what the research said, and we're going to make it easy to understand to people as well, rather than getting stuck in a quagmire of political correctness, which is one of the problems of today's society. But a white person looking at a white person doing things, their mirror neurons fire away quite happily. If a white person looks at a non-white person, then their mirror neurons actually either fire much less or don't fire at all. So we're programmed to respond to those we relate to and we feel similar to, and to not respond or even reject people who are dissimilar.
But it's not just even wide. I mean, you could even micro niche that as well.
Yes, you can.
If you think about it, because I mean, let's face it, we were in the gym this morning, and there was this guy who I actually thought was Romanian, and turns out he was he Spanish? But he spoke Spanish. Now, because I speak Spanish, the first instant thing is we found a commonality, and therefore we entered into instant rapport. And I think is when you actually go, when you go to another country, and I think you can't help this, particularly, and this is what's happening a lot with the mass immigration. You're bringing too much mass immigration from one source, which is not really making it diverse. It's just bringing in another race.
And
so they will merge together and create their little pockets in society, and they'll create, but we're not even small, the big pockets in society. People go to where their communities are usually based.
So it's similarity mirrors, and therefore
they'll find their tribe.
Racism is natural and manifest racism is not a problem of the individual,